Hello, everyone. My name is Karthik Bappanad. I am the Center Head of CISEC, Karnataka State Government Center of Excellence in Cybersecurity. To this panel discussion on implementing a responsible vulnerability disclosure program for government sector. The nature of technology is such that it tends to have vulnerabilities or loopholes during its initial days, and it matures over a period of time. This is true not just for information technology, but generally all kinds of technology. However, the key difference in information technology is that the pace of adoption is very rapid in IT. Let's take an example. If you consider aeroplanes, the aeroplanes of today are many factors safer than the aircrafts of, say, 1930s or 1940s. However, there were not as many people traveling by air in the 1930s or 1940s as today. So it took nearly 70 years for the airline industry to reach its first 50 million users. And this slow uptake in technology allowed for the technology to mature over the course. In information technology, though, we see a large uptake in a very small period of time. This provides a large base of vulnerable users for criminals to exploit. Hence, identifying vulnerabilities and plugging these at the earliest is extremely important for securing our IT systems. Every organization needs to have a strong cybersecurity team and secure practices to ensure vulnerabilities are identified before making them available to users. However, as any security expert would admit, identifying vulnerabilities can never be a foolproof exercise. The complexity of the technology stack in any IT system means that there could be vulnerabilities that were not identified before the system was made available to users. To address this challenge, mature organizations run a program through which they invite security researchers to inform them and then only in a responsible manner so that before a bad actor can identify and exploit the vulnerability, they can release a fix for it. Such programs are called Responsible Vulnerability Disclosure Program. Today, we will be discussing the challenges and best practices for implementing a responsible vulnerability disclosure program for government sector. What are the best practices? What are the challenges? Such programs are also called Vulnerability Disclosure Program in some organizations, or Responsible Disclosure Program, or sometimes it's called Vulnerability Contributor Program. In this discussion, we will use the term Responsible Vulnerability Disclosure Program, or its abbreviation RVD program or RVDP. These programs are called as bug bounty programs sometimes when there is a monetary reward attached to it. Right, so we have a stellar panel today with us, so let me introduce them. We have Dr. Ajit Aspai, who is Director General of CIIPC, National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center. Dr. Aspai is a veteran with 40 years of rich operational experience in the field of information technology, information warfare, and cyber. He is an alumnus of IIT Delhi and a scholar from Cranfield University. He has a PhD in the field of probabilistic modeling. He is a member of various committees on technology and cybersecurity at the national and represents India in several strategic international joint working groups. Welcome to the discussion, Dr. Bajpai.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We also have Ms. Katie Musoris, who is the founder and CEO of Luta Security. Katie is a pioneer in coordinated vulnerability disclosure and is best known for her ongoing work preparing complex organizations and governments for sustainable vulnerability disclosure programs. She created the bug bounty program at Microsoft as well as advised the US Department of Defense on Hack the Pentagon. She is the co-author and co-editor of international standards like ISO 29147 on vulnerability disclosure and ISO 30111 on vulnerability handling processes. A warm welcome to the panel discussion, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
We also have in our panel today Mr. Nandakumar Sarvade, CEO of Rebit. Rebit is the IT subsidiary of Reserve Bank of India. Prior to Rebit, Sarvade was CEO of Data Security Council of India, Director at Citibank India, heading Security Investigation and Vigilance, and also General Manager of Financial Pension Group at ICICI Bank. Sarvade served with the Indian Police Service for 21 years, during which he has also served in the CBI for 7 years. Welcome to the discussion, sir.
Glad to hear.
Also in the panel today, we have Mr. Sachin Raj Shetty, Head of Information Security at Ola. Sachin has over 20 years of experience, with most of the experience in leading and managing information security programs, as well as developing security products and components. Sachin is a patent holder in the area of information security and is also a strong proponent of bug bounty program. Welcome to the panel discussion, Sachin.
Thanks, Karthik, and hello, everybody.
So let me start the discussion with you, Sachin. Can you explain what are the key components of a responsible vulnerability disclosure program? And also maybe explain what is the difference between RVDP and a bug bounty program.
Okay, so let me take the second question first, the difference between RVDP and a bug bounty. So a bug bounty is a responsible vulnerability disclosure program where we incentivize the researcher by giving him monetary benefits. So the amount usually depends on the severity of the issue that is identified, and also the funds that is allocated by the organization for bug bounty. Any RVDP is successful when many researchers come to our platform for finding vulnerabilities, come to the platform for finding the vulnerabilities. The way we make this attractive is by making it a bug bounty program. So unlike in RVDP, with regard to bug bounty, you will need to clearly mention in the policy for the researchers on what type of issues qualify for a bug bounty payment. Also, in order to make an RVDP program as a bug bounty, you will need to have additional step to make bug bounty payment to the researcher. This involves getting his ID proof, bank account details, and having the process for transferring the amount, and also meeting the necessary taxation requirements. This gets a little complex when you have to make payments to international researchers, as you have to deal with cross-border transactions involving multiple currencies, foreign exchange charges, and transaction requirements. Now, with regard to the key components of RVDP, the first and foremost is the policy. So there are two types of policies. One is the external policy for the researchers, where you clearly specify what qualifies for bug bounty payment. You also tell what he can do and what he should not be doing, actually. So all these are detailed in the external policy for the researchers. Then you also have an internal policy where you have SLA specified, because any vulnerability that is identified by the researchers needs to be given utmost importance and highest priority, and it has to be fixed within the SLA, within as early as possible. So this internal, every engineers who work in the system need to be aware of this internal bug bounty policy, and they should also be aware of the SLAs, so that any bug bounty or any RVDP issue is given the highest priority, and the issues are resolved as early as possible. The second key component is the platform for managing the life cycle of the issue that is identified by the researcher. Right from the time when the researcher submits the issue in the platform, you need to automatically let him know that, okay, we have received your issue, and you also need to create have a way of tracking the issue, like we give a ticket number to the researcher. And then again, within 24 hours, we identify if the issue is valid or not. And we let the researcher know if it's a valid issue or invalid issue. And in certain cases, we might ask additional information from the researcher for reproducing the issue actually within our environment. So this platform need to take care of right from opening the issue to fixing the issue, and if the bug bounty is involved, the platform should also take care of the seamless payment to the researchers once we identify that the issue is actually a valid one. The third important component is the bug bounty committee itself. You need strong security engineers within your organization to even validate if an issue that is identified by the researcher is valid or not, and secondly, if the issue qualifies for a bug bounty or not, and what should be the amount, etc. So third important component is the bug bounty committee, the strong bug bounty committee. The first one is the policy, the second one is a platform for managing the issues, and the third one is a bug bounty committee. So there is also a maturity model, a vulnerability coordination maturity model, which brings a lot, which provides a frameworks and also brings a lot of structure for various components that I spoke about, and it also helps in measuring the maturity of the vulnerability disclosure program that you're running. And we have Katie in the panel, and she's worked extensively in VCMM. So I will let her give more details on this.
Thanks, Sachin. So Katie, on that cue, RVDP is a great way to engage the security researchers and get insights into vulnerabilities that your internal teams might have missed, right? So what are the pitfalls of RVDP, and what should organizations do to be prepared to roll out an effective RVDP?
That's a great question. So organizations need to prepare by first looking at their existing internal programs for preventing vulnerabilities in the first place, where their investments are in terms of writing more secure code. So, just like health begins in the kitchen, not in the gym, health when it comes to security really begins with writing as secure code as you possibly can. So investing in a security development lifecycle is the most efficient way to prevent vulnerabilities in the first place. Once you've done some of that preventative work, then it comes time to looking for vulnerabilities yourself. And that, that's also part of a strong security development lifecycle where you will have testing processes and tools and people who are experts in security who you either employ yourself internally, or if you can't afford to have those kinds of resources all the time, that you bring in experts under contract as penetration testers, code reviewers, security architecture reviewers. And NIST in the United States did a study on the cost of fixing vulnerabilities, depending on when you found those vulnerabilities in the security development lifecycle. And they did this study using costs, in terms of development costs, testing costs, et cetera, and costs to your customers as well, or your users. And they found that it's 45 times more expensive to fix vulnerabilities after code has been released than if you had fixed it during the design phase, the earliest phase. So I can't emphasize enough that a healthy vulnerability disclosure program actually begins with this preventative process. Now, once you actually have invested in those areas and you're ready to start a vulnerability disclosure program, one of the things that it's important for you to do is do a scan of those systems that you're about to put in scope. Sachin did a great job of describing some of the things that you need to put into consideration for security researchers. Is you define the areas that you want them to look at most closely, and you also define areas and things they should not do, such as trying to social engineer your organization, because we all know that every organization is vulnerable to social engineering. You don't need them to tell you that, that type of thing. But one of the things that is important is thinking about what would you like researchers to do when they encounter data. And that data may be your own corporate data, your organizational data. It may be the data of your users. But thinking through, what do you want them to do if they stumble across data that they were perhaps not supposed to be able to see? And that's something very important to be able to define in your scope as to what you would like them to do, what you would prefer them to do. And the best practice there is to say that, do your best not to violate anyone else's privacy. If you are testing for data security issues and data privacy issues, try to do so with accounts that you control yourself, such as setting up test accounts to be able to test one test account to the other, or with permission of the other account holder. So a pair of security researchers who have set up accounts and they've agreed to test against each other. All of those ways in which security researchers can be instructed as to how you wish for them to proceed, especially in handling data vulnerabilities that you may want to know about, but you don't want to expose users to privacy violations. So setting up the appropriate internal investments in security is crucially important, not just in being able to figure out very quickly what you need to do to fix the vulnerabilities, but also in terms of connecting the dots back to your security development lifecycle to ideally never have the same type of vulnerability again. You don't want to waste a good bug by not learning your lesson from that bug. So you really do want to be able to have people on the inside of your organization who aren't just going to fix the one bug that might have been reported, but they will use that bug as a learning opportunity to not just look for other bugs that are similar inside the organization, but also to look for ways that they can enhance their security development lifecycle. Can they bring to bear new tools, new techniques, new technology, or other experts that they might be able to find from the outside to, again, prevent those bugs in the future. It's a waste of good organizational effort and money if you wait, until the end of the development lifecycle to even look for bugs. So, definitely don't use a vulnerability disclosure program or a bug bounty program as a shortcut or skipping steps of you not, being able to do that work yourself. But look at it as an enhancement of the identification of bugs that you've been able to do, and a teaching tool to ideally guide you and your organization to become more efficient over time. You mentioned the Vulnerability Coordination Maturity Model, or the VCMM, as I like to call it. That is it's a maturity model that I developed over the last 20 years of not just working inside of organizations, but also creating these programs for both open source software and closed source software for the biggest software company in the world at Microsoft. And what I noticed is that along the lines of these 5 capability areas, organizations who have matured have invested in each of these 5 areas. So for example, in the organizational capability, has your organization decided that they are going to respond to vulnerability reports from the outside? Even if they don't have a formal program set up yet, have they made the decision that they are going to do something when somebody reports a security issue to them? That's the basic level of organizational maturity. Communication-wise, have they set up a clear way to report a vulnerability to them and made it easy to find them? Over 80% of the Forbes Global 2000 still do not have this particular step. They do not have a clear way that they have identified for you to report a security vulnerability. So it begins to show you that because there's actually quite a bit of complexity on the inside, if you're doing this correctly and you're doing this with the correct investments rolled out in the right order, that the reason why that a lot of these organizations, including the Forbes Global 2000, the reason they aren't all doing this already is because of the complexity sort of under the hood in that digestive system of bugs. So what I recommend to organizations is that first they take a look at their own, not just their vulnerabilities, but how quickly can they fix vulnerabilities that they already know about? What is their mean time to repair for critical vulnerabilities that are reported in software and hardware that they run that somebody else made that they have to apply the patches to? And from that metric alone, we can look at an organization and see very quickly, are they even close to being mature enough to handle inbound vulnerability reports from the outside, or are they already struggling to keep up with patching and vulnerability management without a vulnerability disclosure program? If they're struggling today, they have a lot more investments that they need to make first before they're ready for something like a vulnerability disclosure program, and especially a bounty program where you're adding cash to the incentives We definitely don't want to see organizations doing what I call bug bounty Botox, where they start a bug bounty and they think it's going to make them look very, very secure, but actually they don't have the resources to take care of those bugs on the inside. So, so one of the things that we learned from doing Hack the Pentagon was that, in fact, doing a security scan right before we opened it up to the public was very, very important. One page was accidentally left out of the pre-scanning. And what did that result in? That resulted in a ton of duplicate reports for that one page. So, that's another lesson learned for organizations, that if you have something with a lot of low-hanging fruit, expect to have a lot of hackers reporting the same bug, and expect a lot of frustrated hackers, regardless of whether or not you offer cash rewards. If you offer a bug bounty, only the first of that crowd of hackers is going to walk away with money. The rest of them, you're going to have to trust that they keep it quiet for you, even though they are not getting paid. And it gets worse, actually, with a vuln disclosure program if there are long delays in fixing, because you'll have a number of researchers all reporting the same bug over a long period of time without that bug actually being fixed. You end up in a situation where, without meaning to, you've actually made it worse for your users, because there are a ton of people who know about this bug and no action has been taken. So there are a lot of pitfalls, but luckily there are a lot of mature paths to be able to roll these things out. And even the biggest software company in the world, Microsoft, was able to do it after a study period of their own data and figuring out how to do this correctly. And similarly, the biggest military in the world was able to roll it out as well. And we're seeing more and more adoption as we go on further.
Thank you, Katie. So, vulnerability disclosure program is not a substitute for your internal security practices. It is basically to cover the delta that your internal teams might have missed, which naturally would happen, and to take you to the next level of maturity and give additional assurance to your user community as well, right? Thanks for that input, Katie. So, Dr. Bajpai, if I can, ask you to, so NCIIPC is probably one of the few governmental agencies in India running a RVD program. Can you explain the salient features of the RVDP run by NCIIPC and the key challenges faced by NCIIPC in running the RVDP?
Yeah, Karthik, but before I do that, let me take you to a very interesting background. The fact is that not all critical sector entities either run a bug bounty program or can afford one. But it is our responsibility as a National Nodal Agency for Critical Information Infrastructure Protection to ensure that they are as secure as one would like it to be. We started this about 5 years back, and the motivation is very interesting. If you look at open source information on bug bounty collections, one is distribution of bug bounty, the Microsofts and the Apples and the biggies too. But if you look at the collection, we found a very interesting piece of information, and that was that the maximum bug bounty has been collected in USA. People residing in USA, bug bounty hunters and cybersecurity freelancers in USA. Very close second is India. So that gave us a motivation that there are a lot of security professionals in India, homegrown, who have the capability to earn bug bounty, and they are earning huge amount of money. The problem with the government is that we do not have deep pockets as some of the biggies have. How do you get them into your fold or motivate them to contribute towards a national cause? When we started this program, we were told by many well-wishers and experts that this is bound to fail because the government does not have deep pockets to pay. So why would they contribute at all? Notwithstanding that, we did set up a RVDP framework. We were the first to set up this RVDP framework. Sachin's already covered the nuances of how this framework is to be set up. We've done all that. And surprisingly, the response has been overwhelming. I don't know their motivation. They're not getting paid at all. But it has been overwhelming. I look at it differently. Maybe there are some very major vulnerabilities which is likely to get them some bug bounty. So they report it there and make their money on HackerOne or whatever. But there are a whole lot of vulnerabilities which are specific to the critical sector entities in India, are not likely to earn them they can't monetize it to that extent. That they share with us. And believe me, they not only share those vulnerabilities, they also reach out to us to volunteer to plug them. That's a huge difference. What we do in return is, and why this is working is two things. One is that we protect their identity if they do not wish to disclose it. That is something which we promised to do, and we have been able to do that successfully. There have been many state governments, including Karnataka, when the government approaches us, when we report the vulnerability to them, it's not the security researcher who is doing it now. We are doing it on his behalf. And when the state government approaches us to help them to plug it, we either do it on our own or we reach back to the disclosure and request if he can assist us in doing it. That's how the model works. The challenge that we have is what Katie mentioned. Sometimes we are overwhelmed with this same vulnerability reported by several hundreds and thousands of researchers. While we do encourage them, we don't discourage them by saying, sorry, you were not first of the block, so we will not acknowledge you. We do acknowledge their contribution through an honor roll, which we maintain on our NCIPC website. And of course, a certificate of merit, which goes to them signed by the organization head, which is, I do that. That is working well so far. Rest, we can leave it to questions later.
Interesting perspective, sir. So you are appealing more to the higher calling of people rather than the monetary incentive that is offered in typically other bug bounty programs. Thank you. Thanks for the inputs, sir. So, Sarvajit sir, one of the concerns amongst the research community in India is the legal position, right? Can you explain the current Indian legal position on identification and reporting of vulnerabilities by the research community, and how this impacts organizations as well as security researchers?
Right. So let me start with the disclaimer that whatever I am saying is my own views and not necessarily Rapid's views, etc. I think, having looked at law enforcement for many years, the laws do tend to get interpreted in many different ways. And in India, we have the Information Technology Act as the law which governs computer misuse, etc. And this law has been undergoing a lot of discussion, and it was enacted in 2000 and amended in 2008. And it is, of course, harmonious with the various frameworks on computer crime which are there, which make unauthorized access to a system itself a crime. And the legal provisions have been expanded in 2008 to provide specific punishments for receiving computer resources, stolen computer resources, punishment for identity theft and impersonation and so on. Now, a bug bounty program or a responsible vulnerability disclosure program will probably skirt this issue of the act being seen as a malicious act because the consent is there. However, in a scenario where the enforcement is not informed by a long track record or rich case law around the subject, sometimes the initial action on the part of the enforcers may itself become very disruptive, not only for the individual researcher, but also for the organization concerned, because the legal process gets set off in motion by mere information by anybody in the know of things. So, so that is one thing I feel personally, that it is important to clarify about and provide some kind of legal, or if not legal, regulatory coverage to vulnerability disclosure programs. So that is something which I thought was important to mention. But starting from there, we also go to the governance side of things. And I'm not talking specifically about the government programs or the government organizations, but also the private sector, where sometimes the understanding of cyber issues is low. There are a lot of other considerations about reputation and the fear of being, having a wrong news coming into the news, etc. And the many times the governance people, the management people, tell the security people not to bring problems to them, which may result into bad publicity, etc. So I have known of cases where a researcher found something, came to the CISO, CISO took it to the management told him, deal with it, and don't bring it to us, it's your job to fix, and so on. So unless the top level endorsement is there for such a program, it may not be very successful. Of course, now we come to the other part of it, that there has to be a good security engineering process in place, a good life cycle on code development, testing, etc. A good capability to internally test code before it is deployed and so on. So all of that is, of course, what a mature organization will do and should do. But as we know, resources are always at a constraint. And many organizations are still not very mature in terms of the SSDLC framework which should operate. And this is where we see practical problems which may happen. So that is just my personal thought, having seen at all kinds of cases being reported and people having to defend themselves when they're just trying to do something in good faith.
So probably the research community needs more clarity and maybe even more protection from a legal framework. Thank you, sir.
So just to add one point on the research community. So I've been interacting with people in the security field in India since 2005 when I joined NASSCOM. And we're trying to get the community organized because it is important to have a collective voice, a code of ethics, some kind of track record being built about the capabilities and intentions of people. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. In fact, the CBEST framework, which is there in the UK, provides a very good template about how the research community can itself get organized, can get acknowledged as the collective voice of the community, and then become also the to ensure that people are doing the right thing in the right manner and so on. So I think on the supply side, this is something which needs to happen. The challenge, as Dr. Bajpai said, is many researchers in India are looking at not necessarily Indian bugs and Indian organizations' vulnerabilities, but something which is in the global market because the money is there. And that's why the orientation is outside, which is where a locally focused organization probably has not happened. But I think that such an organization will be really helpful in building the community and making the activity more organized.
So before I ask questions from from what has been discussed till now, we also crowdsourced questions to pose to the panel. So let me ask a few questions from the community. So this is a question from Vinay Jain. Probably I will post this to you, Katie. Vinay asks, will the policy regarding responsible vulnerability disclosure take precedence over a program? Will such policy credit work done in reporting and closure of such vulnerabilities? Will the policy take precedence over program? I think we kind of briefly touched upon this earlier. Sachin also mentioned. I think having a policy is a prerequisite before you launch RVD program.
I see. Yeah. So the policy, of course, you should have the policy published before you launch, but that's still a very superficial part of the overall process. If you think of the process as an intake mechanism or the mouth of the process and an entire digestive system, the policy part is still sort of at that superficial intake point. And I think that there's been a lot of confusion where bug bounty platform companies, they tell organizations that the very first thing you need to do is develop this policy. That's not the very first thing you should do to prepare for a vulnerability disclosure program. That's the first thing you do right before you're about to launch one. But it is not the first step in creating a vulnerability disclosure program, because if you launched one with simply the policy up front, and no digestive system, then you are going to have a bigger problem than when you started. So yes, the answer is yes, but it's more complicated than just setting up the scope and the policy up front.
Okay. So maybe the second part of the question, Dr. Bajpai, I will pose to you. Will positive motivators like leaderboards be utilized for fastest closure rate and RVD participation? So I think it's an interesting point, especially with NCIIPC being a nodal agency. Do you have a leaderboards kind of, you credit to researchers who are open to be mentioned about through your program?
Yeah, we do that already. If you look at the NCIIPC newsletters, which come out quarterly, you will find a list of researchers' names figuring there. A limited number, depending on their value of their contribution. So we have a very complex matrix by which we evaluate his contribution. His contribution could have been very small, but it impacts a very large number of organizations, so he gets certain points, whereas he may have disclosed a vulnerability which is huge, but impacts only one or two organizations in the country. So it's a very complex process, it's not very easy. We have developed a matrix for that. It's an ongoing process, it's maturing. I wouldn't say that it is foolproof. We learn from experience, but yes, there is a leaderboard, which is NCIIPC website and the NCIIPC newsletter. We do not give a ranking as of now because the model is still developing, but the top 15 or 20, depending on the level of the contribution, their names do figure there. And that is a very good system, we thought, of sort of incentivizing them to continue to contribute. The second thing we do is that there are many people whose names do not figure in the honor roll, but they do get an acknowledgement. If their contribution was worthy of an acknowledgement, they get a certificate of merit signed by the DG NCIIPC, which is there for keeps. And you'll be interested to know that many of them have quoted this in their CVs, that we got 6 merit certificate of merit from NCIIPC for disclosing vulnerabilities. It's a very interesting model which works. So I hope that answers the question.
So, interestingly, Vinay also asks, is there a leaderboard for fastest closure rate? So, do you probably, I'm guessing not in the public domain, but do you track in terms of, the organizations within the scope of NCIIPC, how are they in terms of responding to, notifications of vulnerabilities?
Very, very good point. And we have been working on this, but it remains within the ministry and NCIIPC. We tell the ministries that these are the organizations who have the fastest closing rate, and their maturity, in responding to a vulnerability which has been disclosed is X. We don't disclose this to the public, but it remains within the organization and NCIIPC, as well as the ministry and the regulator, because the regulator must know, the ministry must know. So we keep this conversation only between the ministries, the regulator, and the organization. We don't disclose it in the public.
Sure. Thank you. So, Sachin, if I can, look back to you, at Ola, you have your own RVDP, and you also leverage bug bounty platforms like HackerOne. What are the, pros and cons of organization running its own RVD program versus an organization leveraging a third-party platform for obtaining insights into vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so first and foremost, Karthik, in fact, at Ola, we manage bug bounty ourselves. We don't depend on any third-party platform. So we completely manage it internally. even though in fact we do not have any dedicated team members for bug bounty, but the security engineers, which includes application security engineers, cloud security engineers, all of them together, we run the show with regard to bug bounty. Now, with regard to the benefits that we get out of RVDP, so I can think of 5 of them actually. The first one is like, you have lots and lots of researchers than you can possibly hire hunting vulnerabilities for you. The second one is like you have researchers with specialized skill sets looking for vulnerabilities. So we had a set of researchers who only look for subdomain takeover issues whenever we had one, and we could fix that immediately. And similarly, we had another set of researchers only looking for DOM-based accesses actually on our pages, and it helps us in fixing all these issues faster. The third benefit that we get from any RVDP program is that it is cost effectiveness, which means that you don't have to pay for the hours or days of effort that the researchers put. Instead, at Ola, we pay bounty for the valid issues that is identified. And we also have a Hall of Fame page where we mention, where we put the honorable mention of the researcher in that page. The fourth advantage that we get out of RVDP is early identification of vulnerability. Moment a vulnerability is published, say in CV, or it is disclosed in any security conference, we have researchers checking if our applications are vulnerable to those issues, and we get to know about such vulnerabilities at the earliest. So, and it helps us in fixing that soon. The first and the fifth and the most important one is it helps in identifying gaps in information security program and also maturing your information security program. Now there has been if there is a lot of vulnerabilities that is identified in a microservice within an application, then that you need to train the developers who is developing that microservice, so in order to bring down the or in order not to introduce these vulnerabilities while coding. Similarly, another example, we had multiple submissions from researchers where our internal portals like Kibana, etc., were exposed to externally. So we took that feedback from RVDP, and we internally wrote a script that runs frequently to detect such critical portals that is exposed publicly. So and also it helps us in making this portal internal. So this helps in identifying the gaps and in maturing the overall information security program. So at Ola, what worked very well is we have gotten the leadership support and also some funds for bug bounty. So this is something that has worked really well. And also with regard to policy, we have been able to successfully enforce the policy, which means that every engineer knows that when a bug bounty issue comes, that has to be given the utmost importance and it has to be fixed within the SLA. And we closely track the SLAs to ensure that if there is a delay, how do we go about correcting that, and how do we ensure that any bug bounty issue is fixed at the earliest. And again, we have a strong bug bounty committee team actually, who who is capable of understanding the issue that is identified, and also assigning the right severity and also the bounty amount for each and every issue that is identified.
Right. Thanks, Sachin. So, Dr. Bajpai, one of the points which Katie had mentioned earlier was, on how your internal security practices should be strong to make the RVD program effective, to get the best out of it. Now, NCIIPC being a nodal agency, you don't have too much of control over the security practices within the various organizations under your ambit. You will be primarily coordinating with the security and IT teams of multiple organizations. How do you at NCIIPC handle this model where you are told of vulnerabilities, you know the severity, but you don't have much say over the fixing of the vulnerabilities?
No, let me clarify this. We deal with the two kinds of organizations. Firstly, we are responsible for the protection of critical information infrastructure. Now, there are critical sector organizations. There are 6 critical sectors as categorized in the country. We'll not get into the details of those, but the fact is that there are 6 critical sectors. Now, it is the responsibility of the respective ministries to ensure that any critical sector organization has a certain baseline level of resilience and security controls which are required. Now, if any one of them has been notified as protected or a critical information infrastructure by an office memorandum, then it is binding on that organization to for us to enforce whatever we want to. So if a responsible vulnerability disclosure program comes up with a vulnerability which pertains to those organizations, it becomes binding on them to plug them and give a feedback to NCI IPC. It's binding, so it is not voluntary. The rest of the organizations which are not yet notified as protected or a critical information infrastructure organization, it is the responsibility of the regulators and the ministries to sort of enforce that and give them a time-bound program in which they need to plug those and report it back to the ministries, and the NCIPC is always available to assist them in case of any mitigation which is required.
Okay. And does this framework also, mention timelines or impose timelines on the security teams to fix, depending on, say, the criticality of the vulnerability identified, criticality of the system on which it's been identified, etc.?
It is not always possible to give a very rigid timeline because it depends on the severity of the vulnerability which is disclosed. But for the first category of organizations which are notified, protected, believe me, the complete team is breathing down their neck and ensuring that it is plugged as soon as possible. Within the technical constraints and otherwise. In other cases, we do seek regular feedbacks and updates to keep the pressure on the organizations to respond and plug them as soon as possible. While there is no strict timeline laid down, okay, you have to do it in so many hours or so many days, because it's not always possible to quantify this.
Sure. So Dr. Bajpai had also mentioned about the security community in India. So India has a vibrant security research community. Katie, what would be your recommendations to Indian organizations, specifically government organizations in India, for engaging security research community based on what Dr. Bajpai had mentioned on what we are already doing?
What is wonderful about what they found out already, about what they're already doing, is that there are plenty of domestic security researchers who already want to contribute, even though there might not be big cash rewards involved. And we certainly were worried about that participation level when we launched Hack the Pentagon. Even though there was a bug bounty involved, we were still concerned that we could open the doors and nobody would show up. So we were very happy to have that willingness to help confirmed as well when we tried this in the US government. The main thing that you can do to keep researchers happy and engaged with your program is being responsive. And that's not just in acknowledging that you received their report and communicating with them about the status of the investigation, but actually fixing the vulnerabilities in a reasonable time frame. And, as has been pointed out earlier, not all vulnerabilities can be fixed extremely quickly. And being able to communicate to the researchers why a vulnerability might be taking a little bit longer gets very, very tricky, especially in cases where you've done your investigation of the vulnerability, you've figured out that, yes, it is indeed a vulnerability, but you may have also figured out that it's going to be difficult to fix it either in a point fix there, or maybe it's easy to create a fix but difficult to deploy that fix. So for example, some of the worms that have ripped through the internet were absolutely for issues for which there was a fix available. A patch was available, but it had not been rolled out and applied yet. So looking at not just the creation of the fix, but how easily can you deploy it to vulnerable systems is another consideration. And when you're explaining why something might be taking a little bit longer. There's another metric around speed to fix that gets confusing as organizations become more mature. And, not always is it the best thing to fix everything as quickly as possible and issue a patch. Why is that? Well, you might be skipping investigation steps. So for example, a researcher may report one vulnerability on one endpoint. And if you rush to fix that one endpoint, but there are hundreds of other vulnerable endpoints, well, then you've just told the world that there are hundreds of other vulnerable endpoints by issuing that one point fix a little too quickly. So there are things to take into consideration when you're working with researchers along those lines. If they point out one or several endpoint vulnerabilities and you fix those, and then they come back with additional examples of the same vulnerability type, you need to make a decision organizationally, if you're doing a bug bounty, of whether or not you pay out those additional instances, even though it's the same root cause, or if you honor a root cause only type of payout structure, in which case you need to examine, why did you miss those additional endpoints when you were doing your remediation? So I would say, honestly, when it comes to security researchers, just like the rest of humanity, motivations are a mix of compensation, recognition, and the pursuit of intellectual happiness, right? So the means of trying to figure out a puzzle and being treated with respect. So I think that organizations will run into complexities, and it's a matter of being transparent around those hurdles that organizations are facing. And that organizations realize when they need to commit more resources to the internal, investigation and remediation of vulnerabilities. And one trigger for understanding that, oops, we need more resources is seeing multiple instances of those kinds of vulnerabilities where you maybe have done an incomplete fix or a point fix in one area and missed several others. That to me is a clue that your organization perhaps needs more personnel or needs better procedures, or both, to ensure that you don't make those same types of mistakes that are essentially repetition errors, right? You have either failed to repeat a test across your entire organization, or you failed to learn the lesson that a hacker was trying to tell you with that, one instance of a report.
Thank you, Katie. Sarvadar sir, you mentioned about the need for the security research community to organize themselves and come up with a code of conduct. What do you recommend? How do you recommend the research community to pursue this?
So we have some good models in India which have been in practice for some time. The legally mandated communities like the accountants, the lawyers, and the medical professionals are there. Of course, the way these organizations are able to influence the behavior of their members is something which keeps improving or evolving, I would say. Likewise, if I always say that the shelf life of a security research is always very low, because the kind of time and intensity that people have at a certain age wanes, and then they get into more organizational work and so on to build one or serve in one, and then the skill sets become maybe obsolete or something. So it's a bit of a challenge to attract people very early when they actually would rather focus on their technical side. But something which creates a good career map to show a financially sustainable growth path is what the organization can aim to showcase, and then also provide assurance to the beneficiaries of the services that there is a certain maturity to how this activity is carried out, and then thus provide a mutually beneficial kind of a model. So that is the kind of vision I think that is good to start from. But how exactly people can go about, probably people in that field would be better placed to work on and then come up with a plan.
Thank you, sir. So I have come to the end of my question. So it's been a great discussion. We covered the prerequisites for implementing a RVDP. What does a good RVDP should look like? how the government how the various government entities can leverage the RVDP program. What kind of legal framework do we have today, and what kind of legal protection can we consider providing for the research community, etc. It's been a fantastic discussion. Any closing points from all of you? So I'll just go on the table. So Sachin, any closing points from your side?
So we've been running a bug bounty program at Ola for over 4 years, and I've really seen the benefit that this program brings. There have been lots and lots of critical issues that has been identified by the researchers, and we have kind of fixed that. I strongly recommend responsible vulnerability disclosure program or even bug bounty for the government sectors.
Thank you, Sachin. Katie, any closing remarks on your side?
Sure. I think that vulnerability disclosure programs and bug bounty programs are important tools in the overall toolkit of security practitioners. I think that organizations need to look at themselves as whole systems, really put the organism in organization, and make sure that their investments are really sound, because starting a VDP or a bug bounty too soon can result in taking away critical focus on security in other areas. I do love this idea of embracing security research and using that for the greater good, especially when it comes to helping governments strengthen their cybersecurity and identify talent, both inside and outside the country, to help them with that mission. But I do think that we do need to make sure that we're making our investments soundly and maturely, and then every party in vuln disclosure will benefit from that.
Thank you, Katie. Salvador, sir, any closing remarks from your side?
I think this has been a fascinating discussion. Personally, I have picked up quite a few interesting perspectives. I feel that as Katie said, the primary program has to stabilize before something like this, which is a value addition, can come in. This is a very valuable feedback loop, no doubt of it. But the basics of good security engineering are, I think, absolutely essential to put in place first. In government in particular, some of these thought processes are lagging by a few months or few years, to say, to how the private sector works. So the appointment of CISOs itself took place late, and the whole program is still evolving. So I think it is good if the government organization also catch up quickly, and then this program RDP becomes very, RVP becomes very useful, and that is probably the way to go.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for participating in the panel discussion, for contributing some excellent points. It's a small world, so the security community is probably still smaller. So hopefully we'll be engaged, as we move along, and as we, work towards improving the security posture of various entities in India. Hopefully, we will get to work together and collaborate again. Thank you for joining.